You'd arrived on the ship 2 hours before, and the only pecking order you understood was how much experience you had.
In the medical field, yeah,
Right.
medical surgical field, yeah. And there was two major.
Sorry, I'll make a scrambled egg sandwich for you. Half of it.
No, I don't need it.
You don't want it?
No, I had a banana, just a whole banana.
Okay.
Thanks. Anyway, there was a flight surgeon on board by the name of Zeph Lane. He was a really nice guy, and he seemed like a smart guy, but his only training was flight surgery.
Mm-hmm.
So he'd had an internship, and then he had gotten accepted into the flight surgery program. And flight surgery sounds like an impressive name, but it was a Navy school down in Pensacola, and it was 6 months of total training. And basically it was designed to teach flight surgeons how to take care of pilots, which basically meant how to counsel them, because they had just tons of psychological issues. If they came close to wrecking a plane and they saw their whole life, then they were in need of months of counseling and everything else to get them back behind the stick and get them up there flying again.
Right.
And they didn't really have any experience doing surgery or dealing with really sick people, because if there was ever an accident and if somebody was really hurt, the flight surgeon had no role at all. They were sent off to the specialists, guys like me, who had 5 years of surgery training at that point and lots of ICU training. Anyway, so there was him, and he was the guy I could kind of bounce questions off of. And then there was the senior medical officer. His name was O.J. Blackwell, and he was maybe the worst doctor I've ever known in my life. He was a guy who was from Ashdown, Arkansas, and a little tiny town down in southern Arkansas, and he just didn't know much anything.
Uh-huh.
And he was, but he was an old guy. He was probably near 65 years old.
Mm-hmm.
And he had just come back in the Navy. He had been in private practice as a family doctor down in Ashdown, Arkansas. Now, you have to assume that he wasn't very successful at it, because at that age, he comes back in the Navy to make a living. Well, he was given 4 stripes. He was a captain,
Mm-hmm.
and to get him back in, and he was given the position of a senior medical officer on an aircraft carrier, which he knew nothing about whatsoever.
Wow.
But he was in charge of the few doctors that were there on the ship, and one other guy was a intern who was wanting to be an orthopedic resident, and eventually went on to be an orthopedic resident. But anyway, so here I am, and I get this message from the corpsman, and the corpsman says, "Hey, Dr. Sessions, we just got a message from the Lawrence." I believe that was the name of the ship. Was it destroyer? And they've got a guy over there on their ship that the corpsman over there thinks has appendicitis, and he'd like to send him over for a consultation with you. I said, "Yeah, fine, send him on over. Just call me when he gets here." And they sent a boat over with this kid on it, and he was a very odd duck. He was about 4'11" tall. He was a redhead. He had his whole body was freckles. He just was an odd-looking guy. And so I looked him over, and I said, geez, I don't think he didn't have any belly pain to speak of, but he was sick, and he had a fever, and he was breathing hard, And I said, all right, we got to have a chest x-ray. And the guy who did x-rays took a look at me and he said, we haven't taken an x-ray on this ship in 6 months. I said, what? He said, yeah, we haven't taken any x-rays. I said, why not? He says, we just don't need to, so we don't. And I'm thinking, well, shit, we're going to start taking some x-rays just so you can get some practice and so we can make sure all the equipment works in case we ever do need it. And he says, well, okay, I'll see what I can do. So he goes off and he comes back about an hour later, and he had taken the kid down to x-ray, got an x-ray, and it shows this pneumonia involving both of his lungs, most of his lungs, and it was pretty bad pneumonia.
Yeah.
And I said, well, he's got pneumonia, and he doesn't need an operation, but what he needs is he's going to need a ventilator pretty soon if he doesn't get better. So we gave him a bunch of antibiotics, hoping it was a bacterial pneumonia, that the antibiotics would help. And I just kept him there in the sick bay in a bed, and slowly but surely he just got worse. And by probably 3 or 4 hours later, he was clearly worse, and it was getting dark.
Mm-hmm. It was all the same day.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
This was started middle of the afternoon, and now it was 8 or 9 o'clock at night.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, if he gets worse during the night, this kid's gonna die.
Yeah.
He's gonna arrest and die because we don't have anything we can do for him except help him breathe. And so I said, we got to let's get the ventilator out. They said, ventilator? We don't really have a ventilator. I said, what do you mean? I said, this is a state-of-the-art U.S. Navy aircraft carrier. It's got 7,000 men on it. Don't tell me we don't have a ventilator. I said, no, we don't. We have this little bird thing, and it's an old-fashioned type ventilator that hadn't been used in 10 years. And I said, well, okay. So I thought about it. I said, well, what we've got to do for this kid is we've got to keep him alive for a while till we can get him off this ship and get him into an ICU. And they looked at me like I was, from another planet. And I said, well, what do we have to do to get him off the ship? And about that time, OJ, the senior medical officer, he comes back in and he says, well, we can't get him off the ship. I said, he's ours to deal with. So let's just put him in the bed there, and if he dies, he dies. And I said, you're kidding me. He says, no, that's all we can do. I said, well, can't we get him off the ship? He says, no, we're not allowed to. We have a treaty with the Spanish government. We were off the coast of Palma, Mallorca, where Stephen got married, and beautiful place. And but it was Spanish water.
Sure.
And we have a deal with the Spanish government. We can't fly helicopters after sunset and until sunrise.
Wow.
I said, well, you mean we've got these incredibly sophisticated helicopters? They've got radar and everything else, and we can't fly them because it's dark? They said, yes, sir, that's the way it works. I said, all right, then let's move him up to the operating room, and let's put him on the operating table, and let's intubate him, put a tube in his breathing pipe, because he's not going to make it through the night without help breathing. And once again, they all looked at me like I was some kind of a nut.
Right.
And that's exactly what we did. We moved him up to the operating room. Operating room tables are nice because you can get right up to the head of them,
Yeah.
and they're narrow, and you can lift them up, and they got good lights and so forth. And so I put him on the operating table, and I intubated him, and I let Zeph lay in the flight surgeon squeeze the bag for me. And I said, listen, I got to go talk to the captain. And so I had to use the chain of command. So I had to call OJ back in. And he says, well, yeah, we can go talk to the captain, but he's not going to fly a plane off this ship at night. I said, well, I just need to talk to him.
Yeah.
And so that was one of the more interesting experiences of my life, really, was going up to talk to the captain. And the admiral was sitting there too. He was in charge of the whole fleet.
Wow.
And I was
Wow.
And here I was, this doctor from Bethesda Hospital that had never been on a Navy ship to speak of before. And I'm sitting in this room. It's called the CAC, a Combat Command Center. Maybe it's the CCC.
Okay.
And so I go in this room, and it's dark. And around the whole edge of the room are all of these maps. And they're clear maps. And there's a sailor standing behind every one of them. And he's got on earphones and a microphone. And he's got these grease pencils in his hand. And he's marking where every Russian sub is, and where every Russian ship is, and where every American ship is. And they're all marked on these maps. They didn't mean anything to me, but
Yeah, sure.
that's what they were. And so I go in there and explain to the captain what's going on.
Oh, yeah, sure.
And he basically is just straight up with me. He says, well, I'll see what we can do to get some help here in the morning, but we can't fly him off during the night. And I said, okay, that's all we can do. So I went back down to the operating room, and me and Zeph sat there and squeezed the bag all night long. And about 5 a.m, we got the word that a Nightingale plane, that's what they called these big, they were C-130s, I think. They were evacuation hospital planes.
Mm-hmm.
And they had used them to transport all the injuries back from Vietnam.
Okay.
And so they had a number of ICU beds on them. They had ventilators, they had respiratory therapists, they had oxygen, they had...
Buddy, you should hear you want to hear the rest of the story?
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Cool.
And
Okay.
so he said, I got the word from the captain that they were sending a Nightingale down from Wiesbaden, Germany, big military hospital in Wiesbaden that you would hear about on the news all the time, because that's where they would evacuate all of these anytime there was a problem.
Mm-hmm.
They would take the people to the hospital there. So I knew of it, but that's about all I knew. And I just hoped I never got, no, Ollie, no. And so I thought, well, that's a good step. At least we're going to be able to evacuate the kid in the morning.
Right.
And we got another X-ray, I think, and it was terrible. And his oxygen level, that's another machine they had to break out that they hadn't used in months, a blood gas machine.
So you had him intubated. Was he also unconscious, or he was back awake?
We were giving him drugs to keep him down, so he wouldn't. Most people don't like to have a tube in their throat.
Right. Uh-huh.
And of course, he didn't know what was going on. He was enough out of it, and so he would be thrashing around some, and I just kept giving him more Valium and other drugs to keep him sedated.
Right.
And so the word came that the Nightingale was on the ground over at, I think, Valencia, Spain.
Okay.
And that was a short helicopter ride over there. And so arrangements were made to crank up a helicopter at daybreak.
Yeah.
And they looked up what time it was going to be daybreak. And so I said, okay, let's get him up on the helicopter. So we loaded him into one of those stretchers that's got wire around the sides to keep him from falling out.
Yeah.
Strapped him into that thing, and we had the bag there and the ventilator. And I didn't think I should leave the ship. But Zeph, the flight surgeon, he was cool on this. He loved flying on helicopters, and he'd actually gotten some stick time. He'd actually gotten to fly the things. And he was raring to go. And so, you know, I told him what to do, and it was just going to be a 10-minute flight, I think, something like that. And I crawled in the helicopter for a minute and made sure everything was all set and ready to go. And I got out, and off it took, and the kid was gone. And I thought, you know, the whole time I was in the Navy, we oftentimes from Bethesda or from anywhere would evacuate patients to other more sophisticated places, and we'd never hear anything back about them. And I never figured I'd hear another word about this kid, whether he survived or anything. And time went by. You know, Zeph came back in an hour. He was back on the ship with the helicopter, and that was the end of that day. And then for the rest of my months out there, you know, I think I did 4 appendectomies, and every time I would say to the senior medical officer, I said, I got a guy I need to do an appendectomy on. Would you call the captain and tell him to turn into the wind so the ship won't be rocking too much while we operate on this kid? And he would always say, yeah, sure, no problem, and he would go do it. But it was like he had to insert himself in that chain of command. I'm like, give me a break.
Yeah, right.
You don't make any decisions. You're such a dumbass. And he was. And anyway, I think I did a total of 16 operations. But you see, I also didn't have any anesthesia. So I would have to do the anesthesia myself, which basically always consisted of a spinal anesthetic. We'd sit the patient up on the table, wash off their back. I'd stick a needle in their spine and give them the medicine, and then go numb from the waist down or so, or from the chest down, and then I'd make sure that was all set up good, and lay them back down, go out and wash my hands, and come back and do the surgery. It was a one-man act.
Wow.
I mean, and so when I got back, I wrote a letter to the Surgeon General, and I said, you know, this is crazy. You're sending surgeons out there, but they don't have any anesthesia. How can they really do much? I was lucky that all I ever had to do was pretty minor cases. Yeah. And they changed that. So sure enough, a few months later, whenever a surgeon went out, a nurse anesthetist went with them so they could do anesthesia. Wow. And they got their x-ray machine working good, and they got their blood gas machine working good. And after that, I just would always, if there were any question, I'd say, oh, we need an x-ray. Yeah. Because I just wanted
to use it.
I wanted them to use it. Yeah. I mean, we had this millions of dollars worth of stuff out there, but if you don't ever use it and nobody feels comfortable with it,
Right.
what the hell's the use of it?
Right.
So anyway,
So, talking to the captain and the admiral, so were they immediately fine with the idea
yeah,
of getting a plane? It was just the senior medical officer who was like, "Well, if he dies, he dies."
that's true.
Yeah.
He just didn't know. He didn't.
Yeah.
He didn't understand anything that was going on.
Yeah.
I mean, it was kind of sad.
Yeah.
Because he was in charge,
Yeah.
but everybody on the ship didn't pay him any mind.
Right.
I mean, the only thing he did was sign some papers, I guess.
Yeah.
And they'd pretty much come to me with everything if it was a medical situation.
Right.
And we handled everything from that point forward very easily. I don't think we transferred another patient off the ship time I was there.
Yeah. Gotcha.
And
And you never found out about the red-haired kid?
oh,
I thought there was.
thanks for asking.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, so I was back at Bethesda. It was after 3 more months at sea. The ship sailed back across the Atlantic, which was kind of cool. I got to accompany the ship on the transatlantic crossing. We pulled into Norfolk. Miss P was there,
Uh-huh.
and I got back up to Bethesda, and that was my first year of my payback time. And then they put me on the staff of the university, the military medical university of the health sciences. I became a surgery professor, and so I taught and gave lectures and had made rounds with a bunch of medical students, and it was very fun. I loved that part of I did that for 2 years, and then I got out and went to the Dalles.
Hey, let's get.
It's 10. Did you want to take Ansel to the pool?
Oh, just a sec.
Okay.
So here you are being a professor at Bethesda.
Yeah, nothing very exciting happened there, I don't think. I mean, we did some big cases,
But you never found out about the red-haired kid.
So one day, this guy, a corpsman, comes up to me and hands me this message, and it was a Xerox copy of a message, and I went to read it, and I still have it. It's probably in the living room here somewhere in my surgery book, and it said that the staff and crew and captain of the USS Lawrence thank the crew, the medical department of the USS America for their care of this guy. And the letter went on to say that he had been on a ventilator for 130 days, I believe. He was sick. And what it was he worked down in the engineering department, making the turbines turn that generated the energy that made the ship go.
Yeah.
And there was some gas released down there one day, and he had breathed it, and it had fried his lungs.
Whoa.
And that's what gave him the pneumonia.
Huh.
But he got sent back to, I think, Norfolk, and he was in the ICU there at Norfolk for all this time. But he finally recovered, and he returned to duty.
Oh. Well, that's very well done.
Yeah, we did good.
Yeah.
Let me see if I can find that message.